Hey everyone, in today's video I'm going to discuss citations, both works cited entries and in-text citations. And to start, I wanted to take a look at an example works cited page. Okay, so one of the things that I often will hear when it comes to discussing works cited entries and citations is, well, this isn't something I really need to learn because there are citation generators out there that will do it for me. And I think Microsoft Word even has something along those lines that will create a citation for you. And these seem to be something that will save you time and energy and ensure that you get it correct. Typically, they do none of those things. Your standard citation generator that you're getting online, even if you're using it through Microsoft Word, it's probably going to give you something that's incorrect. It's probably not actually going to take much more time than just producing your own citation. The best way to do your citations is to use examples and take the information from the examples and match it to the information in your source. And what you'll usually find is that for most of your sources, creating a citation really isn't that difficult if you know the basics and you've got some good examples to follow. Now the book gives you tons of examples of types of sources that you can use or that you might use on a works cited page. But you typically the most common sources you're going to find are typically going to fall in just a few categories that I'm going to cover in today's video. But before I get that, I just want to point out a few things about the works cited page in general. I have an example works cited page. This is an example that I'm going to make available to you. A works cited page is always going to have the words works cited at the top of the page. Okay, this always comes at the end of your essay. It typically begins a new page, begins the last page of your essay. Though, if you're actually printing an essay for a professor, sometimes professors are okay with short works cited pages being on the very last page if there's room. But traditionally, they begin a new page. All right, but they always begin with the heading works cited. The heading is always centered. It's not underlined, italicized. It's not in bold. It's just the words works cited. And then you have the entries themselves are always in alphabetical order. So C comes before D, which comes before G, which comes before M. Right. So that's always the order. It's always double spaced, same spacing and font as the rest of your essay. Okay. And they always have a hanging indentation. So one thing you'll see here is that the first line stands out, the other lines do not. Okay. So that makes it easy to find the source you're looking for. So if I'm looking for a source that I know begins with the word Gowdy, then it's easy to find that source. All right, because of that hanging indentation. Now the hanging indentation, it can be tricky, and one of the issues that I often find students running into is they try to do this indentation themselves using some combination of the enter key and the tab key or the space bar to create the hanging indentation. And it almost always seems to actually create formatting issues, especially when you convert it, right? So it may look great on a Google Doc, but then if you're converting it to Microsoft Word, then usually it doesn't come out right. Okay, so the best way to do the hanging indentation is to use the hanging indentation function in whatever program you're using. And depending on the program, it's going to be different, but it's something that you can typically find with a Google search. If you search, how to do hanging indentation in a Google Doc, or even go to the help function. It's usually not hard to figure out. For Microsoft Word, if I highlight everything and select paragraph, and I have the word paragraph here, this button here actually will open the window for paragraph. I could also do it by just right-clicking and selecting paragraph. Okay, but in paragraph I have indentations and spacing. So I can choose a hanging indentation, or I could choose no indentation. Okay, no indentation looks like that. Hanging indentation. There's also first line indentation, which is how which is what you should have set for the paragraphs of your essay. But hanging indentation is going to do that automatically. And it's going to eliminate a lot of headaches. So once you figure out how to do it automatically using your program, it's going to be a lot easier for you. Like I said, when you convert it to a different program or you upload it to Blackboard, you're not going to have the same spacing issues that might come up if you try to do it manually for each individual entry, right? So it may seem like more work at the beginning to figure out how to use the program, but once you know how to use it, it's usually really easy. And like I said, it saves you a lot of headaches. So so what I want to do now is take a look at PowerPoint I put together, okay, that covers some of these types of examples of works cited entries. And just point out some of the basics that you need to know. So like I said, if you know the basics and you especially the basics for the most common types of works cited entries, then creating a works cited entry is usually it's usually not very hard to do. And if you do get something from a website or even a citation generator, if you at least know what you're looking for and can identify the common mistakes, you can avoid doing this incorrectly. So most of your sources these days are going to be either from an article from a website or a journal article on an online database. All right, so so the article for the website is going to begin with, usually you're going to be choosing articles that have authors' names. All right, so last name of the author, comma, first name, period, then the title of the article. Okay, titles of articles are always in quotation marks, they're not italicized. All right, period before the last quotation mark, and then the name of the source of the article, name of the website. Okay, so that might be the New York Times, for example. Okay, and the name of the website is italicized. All right, so one way to keep track quotation marks versus italics when it comes to titles, shorter works are in quotation marks, and then the larger containers of those works are in italics. Right, so that's why an article would be in quotation marks, whereas the newspaper that contains that article is in italics. A song would be in quotation marks, whereas the album that contains that song would be in italics. But for the most part, if you're citing an article, that's quotation marks. The website's italics. Usually, books are in italics. So like if you're citing an entire book, that's going to be italics. But usually, if you've got two titles, the first one's going to be in quotation marks. After this, you have the date that it was published. Okay, the listed date, 22 May 2007. And for MLA 8, it's always going to be date, month, year. All right. And then the web address. Okay, now, when I posted this onto here, I accidentally hyperlinked the beginning of the web address. Your web address shouldn't be hyperlinked like this. And it only did the first part. So ignore the fact that this is blue and underlined in this end. You actually don't want hyperlinks in your works cited page. So, but you have the web address, and then you're done. Period at the end of the web address. All right. You don't need to say when you access the site at the end. All right. That is optional, and really is only given if there's no date here. Okay, so if you don't have a date, listed date for the article on the website, then you can put an access date. It's sometimes recommended, but again, the access date is always optional. All right, and don't ever give an access date if you already have a date before the web address. Okay, a journal article posted in an online database. So we'll learn more about online databases next week, but if you're using a database to find an article, and a database is typically something that it's not Google. Google is a search engine, not a database. So database typically will collect articles that you might otherwise have to pay for, and present it to you for free if you are, say, a student at a college. Okay. So in this case, it begins the same: author, last name, comma, first name. Sometimes you get a middle initial with the name, so that would come after the first name, William D. period. Article title, quotation marks. The source, so in this case, the name of the journal is Science. Journals, particularly academic journals, will typically give you volume and issue numbers. Okay, so that's VOL period, number, comma. NO is the abbreviation for issue number, NO period, and then the number. Again, then after this, comma, date, 9 November 2001. And then if you have page numbers, okay, and journals will often give you page numbers. Okay, it's double P period for more than one number, and then the page numbers. And for longer numbers, you typically give the the full first number and then the last 2 digits for the second one. Okay. And then you have the name of the database. This database is EBSCOhost, comma, and then a link, a web link for that database. All right. Usually with databases, it gives you a citation. That's one of the nice things about using some of these databases, is it will give you a citation. And in that case, you just want to make sure you have the correct citation. You want to make sure you're using, for depending on the class, the correct formatting. So for this class, we're using MLA8. Okay, so if you're getting a citation, you want to make sure you're using MLA8. If you're taking a class, say in psychology, you may be using APA format. All right. Other common entries for a print book. Okay, you're going to have the author's name, the name of the book, and then after the name of the book, you would have the publisher, Springer, comma, and here the formatting added an extra space that should not be there. So ignore that extra space between the publisher name and the year. PowerPoint does not give you a hanging indentation option. So that's one reason why, like I said, sometimes when you convert these things, if you're not using the hanging indentation option, sometimes it gives you weird spacing issues. You don't need to give the city that it was published. All right, so that's no longer required for MLA8. So it's, like I said, pretty easy if you're doing a citation from a book. From a movie, okay, again, there's a little formatting issue that came up with the PowerPoint, okay, when it converted. So this line should be indented the same as Guggenheim. But with the movie, you typically begin with the title of the movie, followed by the director, and then, if relevant, you might include some performances. Movies are notoriously tricky to cite, because depending on what you're saying about the movie, you might cite it a little bit differently. So if you're specifically talking about the direction of the movie, like if you're specifically talking about how the director, the choices that the director made, you can begin your citation with the director's name. All right. But if you're talking about the movie in general, you're talking about multiple aspects of the movie, then just begin with the title of the movie. My recommendation would be to only begin with the title of the movie. All right. And ignore some of the other possibilities that are given to you in the book or on other websites, because you're never going to go wrong by beginning your entry with the title of the movie and doing it this way. Okay. So if you're doing a movie, book, or article review, all right, so that's another common works cited entry. Again, ignore the spacing issues that came up here with the conversion. When Blackboard converted it into the screen, it created that. This should all be indented on the same line as directed by. So, if you're citing a review of like a movie review, then you do need to say that it's a citation of a review, right? So you begin with the author of the review, and then you want to say, period, review of an inconvenient truth. Sometimes the review is given a title, and if that's the case, then if it's an original title for the review, you would put that after the author's name. But if the title is just the title of the movie, then in order to avoid confusion, you just put review of, and then the title of the movie, who directed it, and then the site where you got it. Okay. And this one is less common, but may be relevant depending on the assignment that you get. Okay. Other citation issues you come up with on a works cited page. Sometimes you have a source with more than one author. Okay, so if you have a source with two authors, then what you do is you take the first author and you go last name, comma, first name, comma, and then you give the second author first name, last name. So John Gowdy and Sarah Roberts are the two authors. So it's Gowdy, comma, John, comma, and Sarah Roberts. It almost looks like you have three people named Roberts: Gowdy, John, and Sarah. All right, so it looks a little goofy at first if you're not familiar with that, but that's the formatting for two authors. If you have more than two authors, you get to use this neat little abbreviation, et al. ET space AL period. So if there's more than two authors listed, which you get sometimes on academic journals, then you just give the first author. Okay, and there's always the first author listed. You always use the same order that's given in the source. All right, so you don't change the order. So Milken, comma, Michael, comma, ET space AL period. The period comes after AL, not after ET. All right, and then everything else is the same. And then sometimes you get a source with no listed author, and this is often the case if your source is just coming from a website. So if there's no listed author, then you just skip it in the citation. All right, and this is also true if you say you don't have a date. Okay, so typically, if information is not given to you in the citation, or sorry, it's not given to you by the source, you just skip it in the citation. So we begin in this case with the title of the article, WebMD is the source, and then the date. But like I said, if your source didn't have a date, then it would just be WebMD, comma, and all right. But we don't ever begin the works cited entry with, say, anonymous or no author given. Okay. It always is going to begin, in this case, with the title of the article. All right. So some general rules when it comes to works cited pages. The first two are really important. Okay. Every source listed on your works cited must have an in-text citation, a corresponding in-text citation somewhere in your essay. All right, I'm going to cover in-text citations in a moment. By the same token, every in-text citation must have a corresponding citation on the works cited page. All right, so the works cited page is not intended to list all the sources that you found for an assignment, or even all the sources that you read for an assignment. It only includes the sources that you directly paraphrase or quote in your essay. Okay. And then a few more. Actually, I'm going to skip down a little bit to this slide because this slide covers the works cited entries directly. So a works cited list must be alphabetized, double spaced, and have hanging indentation. All right, just like I showed you at the beginning. Again, with access dates. All right, so you don't need to give an access date for a source. It's sometimes recommended if the source does not provide the date. All right, and in this case, add the word access and the date you viewed the site to the end of the citation. So it looked like access 16 June 2020. Again, the best way to know if your works cited entry is correct is to compare it to a similar example. Okay, if you use a citation generator, more often than not, you're probably going to have something that's incorrect. All right, either because the citation generator is just not very good, or you've entered some information incorrectly, or it's generating using the wrong the wrong formatting. It's giving you APA or as opposed to MLA. There's so many ways that it can go wrong with a citation generator. People assume that that's all they need to do and it's easy. It's usually more work, more hassle. Just, take one of the examples, and I'm going to provide you with common examples I already have. I'll provide you with example works cited pages. If you just compare what you're doing to the example, again, like it's going to make it a lot easier for you to do this. All right. Again, if you're using a database, and some websites will give you a citation, and those are often, if it's a database that's giving it to you or the website's giving it to you directly, those are often correct, but you still need to double check them because sometimes they are incorrect, and sometimes again you've got APA and not MLA, or it's an older version of MLA. Okay, so some quick ways to know your citation is not MLA. Okay, if your citation includes the words web or print near the end of the citation, that used to be a requirement for MLA. It's not a requirement anymore, and it would be incorrect if you did that for MLA 8. If your citation gives the year in parentheses or directly after the name of the author, then you're using either APA or Chicago, not MLA 8. If your citation gives a city before the name of the publisher, then you're using an older version of MLA. If your citation gives the volume and issue numbers in any of the following formats, if you see, for example, 24.2 or an italicized 24 followed by 2 in parentheses, these are either APA or older versions of MLA. So, and a correct MLA 8 formatting for volume and issue number would be VOL period 24 comma NO period 2. All right. So a few guidelines to just keep track of as you're doing your works cited page. If you're ever copying and pasting a works cited entry from anywhere onto your works cited page, don't forget to go back to this #1 general rule. It needs to be alphabetized, double spaced, and have a hanging indentation. And I would add to that the font needs to be consistent with the rest of your essay. So usually if you're copying and pasting, then you usually have to change the font, you have to change the indentation, you have to double space it, and you might have to go in and italicize certain source titles in your citation. All right. So copying and pasting, don't copy and paste and then that's all. You always need to fix the formatting after you copy and paste it and make sure, or at least double check it to make sure it's correct. Okay. All right. So a few things with in-text citations that you should know. All right. So as I said before, with an in-text citation, all your in-text citations need to correspond to a source on your works cited page. So if you're putting a source on your works cited page, what you're saying is that this is a source that I am citing in the text of my essay. And we use in-text citations when we're quoting something from a source or if we're paraphrasing something from a source. If you take an idea from a source and put it in your own words, then you still have to give an in-text citation. All right, so this is how you give credit to your sources in your essay. All right. So if you're doing it with a source with a single author, then you can either give the name of the author in the sentence, all right, or in parentheses at the end. All right. If it's a source that has a page number, the page number should always be in parentheses at the end. All right. So don't ever say on page 3, Kenneth Burke says. Page numbers are always at the end in parentheses. If you don't mention the author in the sentence, then you would also put the author in parentheses at the end. Okay, and if there's a page number, it would be author space number. So with page numbers and in-text citations, you don't use the abbreviation P or the double P. You don't have a comma between the author and the page number. All right, in an in-text citation in parentheses, it's just last name space number. We're always citing with the last name. Okay, so you might mention the full name here, but if you're going to put it in parentheses, only give the last name. All right. Really, the number one rule for in-text citations, or at least often the most misunderstood rule, is that the in-text citation should always direct us to the beginning of the entry on the works cited page. All right. So since we typically begin entries with last names, that's why your citation needs to be a last name. If you cite it with Kenneth, then that's not going to direct us to the beginning of the entry. Or if you cite it with the title of the article, if that's not the beginning of the entry, and that's the only citation you give, that's incorrect. All right, because you should be directing us to the beginning of the entry on the works cited page, because that's how we find the source. That's how it's alphabetized. That's the part that stands out on the works cited page because of the hanging indentation. Okay. If you're citing with two authors, then just list both last names. Okay. Do it in the same order that's on your works cited page. So it would be Best and Marcus. Okay. You don't need to give, and usually if you've got two authors, don't give the first names. And it's conventional in general to just refer to authors only by last name. So with Kenneth Burke, you don't need to say Mr. Burke. It could just be described by Burke as simple using animals. Best and Marcus argue. And again, if you're putting it in parentheses, so if you're not going to mention the author's name in the sentence, they need to be in parentheses. If there's a page number, again, the number here, number here. Now, if there's no page number given, you don't have to give a page number if it's not actually in the text of the document of your source. Okay. So in that case, it would just be Best and Marcus in parentheses. Or in here, if there's no page number, wouldn't have anything in parentheses at the end. Okay. So you don't always have page numbers. All right. And so it's okay to not have a page number. All right. But if you're quoting a source, within the text of the document, there is a page number given, then you should give page numbers. All right. If it's not within the text of the document, then don't give a page number. All right. So for example, if say your document is a PDF, that's your source, but there's no page numbers given within the text of the PDF, don't look at the PDF page number, because the PDF might say page 2 out of 5. Don't use that number as your page number. All right. And if the article is just part of a website, you don't need to bother with page numbers there. All right. If you have 3 or more authors, then again you can use the et al. For your citation. Okay, so Frank et al. And you would, if you're doing it in the sentence, you would just put it in the sentence as if it's part of Frank's name. Frank et al. Period, comma, and then the quotation. Or if it's in parentheses, again, Frank et al. There's no comma between the Frank and the et al. Okay. And again, if you have et al. On your works cited page, it also needs to be in the in-text citation. All right. So if it's on the works cited page, it has to be part of the in-text citation. You can't use Frank's name without adding et al. Because he's not the only person, he or she is not the only person that should be given credit. All right. Same thing with 2 authors. All right. If there are 2 authors on the works cited, you can't just refer to one in the text of your essay. All right. A few more issues you might run into with citations. One, if there's no author given, okay, then you should just use the first important word of the title. All right. So if the title is Impact of Global Warming in America, then just use the word impact as your in-text citation if you're putting it in parentheses. All right, so don't put the full title, just the first important word. And when I say important word, I basically mean if your title begins with a, an, or a the, then the next word. All right, so don't put in quotation mark the, because you're also going to be alphabetizing by the important words. You're not going to alphabetize based on a, an, or the. Okay, so if this source were the impact, then it would be alphabetized based on I, and the citation would be impact. Okay. If you're putting the title in the sentence, though, you do have to give the full title. All right, which is one reason why it's best not to put the full title in the sentence, especially if you have a source with a lot of titles. You don't need to give me the title of your full title of your source. All right, that's on your Works Cited page, or it's alluded to in the parenthetical citation here. Okay, parenthetical just means in parentheses. So you don't need to say in the source impact of global warming in America. Don't do that. The only case where you really might give a full title for a source is if your full essay is in some way commenting upon or analyzing a single source, right? So if you're writing an essay about the book The Sound and the Fury, then yeah, you probably want to mention the title The Sound and the Fury somewhere in your essay. But if you're writing about a topic and you're just using sources, you don't need to give the title. All right. But if there's no author, then you do need to at least put this shortened version of the title in parentheses. Now, another case where you might need to do this, sometimes you might have more than one source by a single author. Okay. And when that's the case, then you should refer to the author's name and give the first word of the source in parentheses. Okay, and if you're giving, I don't have an example of this on my sample Works Cited page that I just showed you, though. Let me see. I can find one really quickly because I know I have an example of this. But yeah, if you have more than one, if you're using a source, if you have the same author, but more than one source by that author, then you only list the author's name once on the Works Cited page, and then you use 2 dashes underneath it. Give me just a second to see if I can find this example. So I can show it to you. Okay, I found it. All right. Okay, that's worth starting the video over. Oh. My computer's not making it easy for me to do this. Okay. Because you might have something like this in your exercise. Not that one, not that one, this one. This is what I want to show you. So in this sample, there are 2 articles here written by William D. Nordhaus. All right, same author, you're using more than one source. This happens sometimes, if you're, because sometimes an author has written multiple articles about your topic. It's not a good idea to have all your sources by the same author, but it's okay to have more than one. If you do this, what you do is you have the author's name listed here, and then any other sources by William D. Nordhaus begin with 3 hyphens. Okay, 3 hyphens, period, and then the titles are listed alphabetically. So after comes before lobal. So that's why you would have that one first. All right. But if you're giving the in-text citation for, say, global warming economics or after Kyoto, then what you need to do is put Nordhaus in the sentence. Okay, so Nordhaus describes, some of the different ways to control climate change, and then in the citation you would put in quotation marks after, okay, in parentheses at the end. So we know it's directing us to the beginning of the entry, Nordhaus, but we also know which article you're referring to. Okay, we know this is coming from after Kyoto and not from global warming. All right. Okay, so I'm going to go back to the PowerPoint now. Okay. All right. So, yeah, so that's, you're most likely going to have some sources where you don't have an author. And occasionally you might have a source with more than one author. And if you do have, one author and multiple sources. So you want to make sure you're doing that correctly if that's the case. Indirect quotations. Okay, this is something that comes up quite a bit. An indirect quotation basically means it's in quotation marks in your source, all right, because they're quoting somebody else. In general, it's usually best to avoid indirect quotations if you can. It's better. It just makes the citation a lot easier just to use your source's words as opposed to your source quoting somebody else. But if you do have an indirect quotation, what you need to do is you need to tell me the name of the person who said these words, and you need to put that in the sentence. Okay, so in this case, Robich said that social service centers don't do well. All right, those were his words, but you found his words in an article by Wiseman. Okay, so your citation in that case needs to say QTD period in Wiseman, and then if there's a page number, Wiseman 259. All right, so it has to have that QTD in. All right, and again, you're only doing this if your source, in this case Wiseman, quotes somebody else. All right, it's an attributed quote. So he says, Robich says this, and then you're going to use Robich's words, not Wiseman's words. All right. And again, if you can use Wiseman's words, use Wiseman's words. All right. So if that's always going to make your citation easier. And also avoid the possibility that, maybe you're misrepresenting Wiseman's position, because it could be that Wiseman is ridiculing Robich's idea. Maybe Wiseman completely disagrees with Robich and his source. So, so you're using Wiseman to talk about Robich, without really explaining Wiseman's point, is in some ways misrepresenting Wiseman. All right, so that's another issue you might run into. Another issue you sometimes have different authors with the same last name. If it's a really common last name, you might get this. And if you do, then just always add the first initial. You don't give the full name, but if it's Roger Miller, put R before Miller, or if it's Amy Miller, put an A for Amy. All right. If they have the same first initial, then yes, just in that case, maybe they have a different middle initial. You might give both the initials, or if you have to, then yeah, just write out the full name. But it is important to make it clear which one you're talking about in the citation. All right. Okay, so last thing, again, some general rules. The first two I already talked about. Every source in the works cited must have an in-text citation, a corresponding in-text citation. Every in-text citation must have a corresponding citation on the works cited page. Quotations and paraphrase must have in-text citations. So sometimes people think you only need to do this if you're quoting something. Not true. All right. And an in-text citation, needs to follow the format that's given. And the format is that it always needs to refer to the beginning of the entry and do it in the correct, using the correct MLA8 formatting. All right, if you're writing an MLA8 essay. All right, so just referring to, so say the source came from the New York Times, just saying an article from the New York Times says, that does not count as a citation. All right, because if the citation begins with an author, then you need to cite with the author's last name. You need to do it in the correct format. All right. A few other things with in-text citations: cite early and often. Okay, when you're using an in-text citation in a source. So in other words, if you're summarizing something and it goes on for more than 2 sentences, okay, then cite the last sentence and don't go more than 2 sentences without giving a citation. Even if it's the same citation, if you're just giving the same citation over and over again, that's fine. But what you don't want to have is a really long summary paragraph, and at the very end of the paragraph there's a citation, and now I have to figure out, okay, well, is the whole paragraph coming from the same source, or part of it? Is some of this, your analysis? So you always want to make it perfectly clear to the reader where the information is coming from, not only to give credit to your source, but also to give yourself credit, right? So, if an idea is coming from you, if this is your analysis, you don't want it to look like maybe this is coming from one of your sources. All right. Page numbers, you only include page numbers if a page number appears in the text of the document itself. So like I said before, don't cite page numbers for web pages or use program-generated page numbers. Like if a PDF or a Word document will tell you page 1 out of 8, so don't use that as a page number. And then sometimes people try to cite paragraph numbers. All right, paragraph number citations are always optional, but should only be given if the paragraphs are numbered in the text itself. So never count the paragraphs and then come up with a number and then cite that as a paragraph number. All right, and paragraph numbers are usually only given if there are no page numbers. So if there's not a page number, if there's a page number given, just cite with a page number. It's a lot easier. But if there's no page number given, but the paragraphs are given numbers, then you can cite with a paragraph number. But that's also very, that's usually doesn't happen though. But if it does, then you can give the last name, comma, PAR period for paragraph, and then the number 4. All right, so a couple of things that make this citation unique. One, the comma, right? For page numbers, you don't have a comma. And then the fact that you do have an abbreviation for paragraph. So page numbers, there are no abbreviations. So PAR period and 4. All right, but again, only do that if the paragraphs are numbered. And paragraphs will be numbered if, say, beside each paragraph, there's a number. All right, that's what I mean. Okay, so that's it for today's video. I'm going to do a video later in the week, maybe Thursday, that talks about the exercises, because I think that going over the exercises is one of the best ways to get a handle on some of these rules. But hopefully this pointed out some of the things that might initially seem confusing or maybe overwhelming in the book, because the book, what the book will do is give you every possible example for every kind of citation you might ever, you could ever use in an essay, and it's a little overwhelming, right? It's better as a reference than as something to read and study. Okay, all right. So thank you, and again, I'll be posting another video later in the week. All right, have a great day.